my friends. How are you? It's the night before Christmas, or Christmas Eve. And I'm here with Mama Bunny and Daddy Ruff Ruff. And I believe it's still Hanukkah today too, so I want to wish you all a Merry, Happy Everything. And I'm going to read The Worst Person's Christmas by James Stevenson. He is one of my favoriteest authors. An all-around great guy. This was written in 1991. The worst person in the world didn't like anything anybody else liked. He didn't like springtime, or music, or dessert, or laughing, or people who are friendly. There he is, sitting there being a grump, all by himself. I have to get a little closer because I'm using my iPhone today. He didn't like his dog Daisy, and Daisy didn't like him very much either. Whenever the worst walked by, Daisy growled. Sometimes she nipped at his pants and wouldn't let go. "I'm thinking of trading you in for a cat," the worst would say. Aw, poor Daisy. But what the worst person hated most of all was Christmas. A few days before Christmas, there was a big snowstorm. The worst looked out at the falling snow. "This could cause a lot of problems for Christmas travelers," he said to Daisy. In the morning, the snow had stopped. The worst person came out carrying a tennis racket. There he is. He whacked the snow off of all his signs. What did they say, you ask? "That's better," he said. They say, "Stay off, no one's home, go away." Boy, he really doesn't like people. The worst looked at his mailbox. "I hope I didn't get any Christmas cards," he said. He opened his mailbox. There weren't any. "Good," he said. "Would you like me to shovel a path up to your house, Mr. Worst?" asked Gordon, who lived down the block. "How much?" said the worst. 10 cents, said Gordon. "Robber," he said. "I'll do it myself." 10 cents is not a lot of money. He went down to his cellar to get his old shovel. At last he found it. "Good as new," he said. As soon as he began to shovel, the handle snapped. "I'm going to take this right back to the hardware store." He passed the Moffats' house where the family was stringing blue lights on a tree. "Kind of cheerful, don't you think?" called Mr. Moffat. What do you think he says? "Waste of electricity," said the worst. In the village, loudspeakers were playing Silent Night. Mrs. Wilson said, "Christmas carols make me all shivery and warm." "Perhaps you should see a doctor," said the worst. He almost bumped into Santa Claus. "Watch it, fatso." Boy, he's not cheerful at all. At the hardware store, the worst said, "You sold me a bad shovel. I want my money back." The man said, "We haven't sold that kind of shovel for 40 years. Sorry, Mr. Worst." "Rip off," said the Worst. The Worst threw away the shovel and headed home. He's not very kind. "A bunch of us are going around singing Christmas carols tonight," said Mr. Feltzer. "How about joining us, Mr. Worst?" "If I want to sing sappy songs, I don't have to stand out in the slush to do it," said the Worst. "Just a thought," said Mr. Feltzer. "We're having our neighbors over tomorrow for cookies and punch," said Mrs. Wilson. "Hope you'll come." "Extremely unlikely," said the Worst. He ran into Walker and Jenny, who lived next door. "Look what Walker made in school, Mr. Worst," said Jenny. "What is it?" said the Worst. "A birdhouse," said Walker, "for my mommy and daddy's Christmas." "Well," said the Worst, "it's not too late to buy something at the store." Walker and Jenny watched the Worst march into his house and slam the door. "At Christmas time," said Walker, "he's more awful than usual." "Maybe it's because he doesn't get any presents," said Jenny. "I wonder why he is the worst at being the worst." "We could give him a present," said Walker. "What would he like?" said Jenny. He wouldn't like anything," said Walker. "That's the problem." "How about a fruitcake?" said Jenny. "He is a fruitcake," said Walker. "Perfect," said Jenny. That night the Worst put a chair by his front window, so that when the caroler singers came, he could tell them to get off his property and go away. He waited for an hour. "Where are those nincompoops?" he said to himself. Half an hour later he heard singing in the distance. "Here they come at last," he said, getting ready to yell. He's just looking for trouble. The carolers approached. "Let's skip the Worst's house," said Mr. Feltzer. "He doesn't like Christmas carols." "It would just annoy him," said Mrs. Moffat. They all walked quietly past his house. "I guess they know better than to stop in front of my house. Lucky for them," said the Worst. He went to bed, but he couldn't sleep. A soft blue light was coming through the window. It was the tree in front of the Moffats' house. He got dressed, went over, and knocked at the Moffats' door. It's him knocking at the door. "Why, it's the Worst," said Mr. Moffat. "Merry Christmas." "Never mind the soft soap. Your tree is keeping me awake." He went back to bed, but he still couldn't sleep. It was very dark now and very quiet. The next afternoon, Walker and Jenny brought a fruitcake to the Worst's house. Jenny knocked on the door. "I'm not home," he yelled. "I went to Florida." "Let's get out of here," whispered Jenny. They left the fruitcake on the doorstep and ran to hide. The worst opened the door and saw the fruitcake. He said, "I'll just run that right down to the garbage can." He put on his hat and coat and picked up the fruitcake. He was stepping off the porch when... What happened? He slipped on the steps. "Uh-oh," said Jenny. The worst flopped onto Walker and Jenny's sled and went careening down the hill, past the signs and the mailbox and the garbage can. And along the street. "Where do you think he's going?" said Walker. "I don't know," said Jenny, "but he's going there awfully fast. Come on." The party at the Wilsons' was underway when suddenly there was a thud. The door flew open and in came the worst. "Look who's here," said Mrs. Wilson. "I didn't mean to," the worst began. "Better late than never," said Mrs. Wilson. "And he brought a lovely present too," said Mrs. Wilson. "Have some cookies, Mr. Worst," said Mr. Feltzer. "Have some punch," said Mrs. Moffat. An hour later, the worst went home, pulling Walker and Jenny's sled. He was humming something that sounded a little bit like jingle bells. Daisy nipped at his pants. "I suppose you think you'll get a biscuit, Daisy." "Now, don't expect one every night, you know. Christmas is special." And that's the story, Morning Glories, The Worst Person's Christmas by Stevenson. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a Merry Christmas and be kind.